Good morning and welcome to today's GNCC Espresso webinar, where we will delve into the topic of infusing consumer research into your development pipeline. My name is Hugo Cheshire and I will serve as your moderator for this session. Normally you would see our CEO Mishka Balsam here, but she is sadly unable to make it today and sends her regrets. I'll be filling in, and thankfully for me, we have an amazing session lined up for you today. This event is proudly brought to you by the Vineland Research and Innovation Centre, a uniquely Canadian organisation dedicated to horticulture science and innovation. Vineland Research and Innovation Centre is committed to delivering innovative products, solutions and services through a collaborative cross-country network, furthering Canada's research and commercialisation agenda. In our rapidly evolving business landscape, staying connected to the ever-changing needs and preferences of consumers is crucial. This webinar aims to illuminate two critical aspects: understanding the benefits of consumer research and seamlessly integrating those valuable insights into your innovation process. In a world where consumer preferences shift like never before, leveraging the power of consumer research can provide your organization with a distinct competitive advantage. However, it's not just about conducting consumer research, it's about skillfully weaving these insights into the fabric of your innovation process. Throughout this webinar, we will explore practical approaches and strategies for effectively integrating consumer research findings into the core of your innovation initiatives. Real-world examples will be shared to showcase the transformative potential of merging consumer insights and innovation. Our featured speaker today is Dr. Amy Bowen, Director of Consumer, Sensory and Market Insights at Vineland Research and Innovation Centre. Dr. Bowen's expertise lies in comprehending the drivers that impact consumer preferences and choices for horticultural products. Her mission is to create tangible impact within the sector by generating value-added results that inform breeding programs, brand development, new variety introductions, and commercialization. So let's dive into this insightful exploration of consumer research and innovation excellence. Today's format is an interactive one, and we encourage you to ask as many questions as you like using the chat function. We'll put as many as we have time for to Dr. Bowen in the second half of our webinar today. And if you wish to enable live transcript, please refer to the bottom of your Zoom screen for that option. And lastly, today's session is being recorded, so if you miss anything, don't worry, you can watch it again. And now, it's my pleasure to turn things over to our guest speaker. Dr. Bowen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hugo. I'm happy to be here today and I'm happy to share essentially the value of consumer research, which is something that I am very passionate about. So let me share my screen here and get everything set up. Okay, so good morning, everybody. As I said, I'm happy to be here today and talk to you a little bit about how you can infuse consumer research into your product development pipeline. So what I'll do, Hugo gave a great introduction, but just give you a little bit about sort of who we are at Vineland Research Innovation Center. So we are a private, not-for-profit horticultural research center, so working on fruits, vegetables, flowers, and trees. And we're really out there to improve the economic viability, sustainability, and competitiveness of horticulture in Canada. And so today we'll kind of sort of show you some of the ways we do that using consumer research. So we are very much about sort of, creating results and impact for the industry. It doesn't matter if it's good news for us, it matters if it's good news to sort of our partners, our collaborators, and the people that we work to support. So we really are about collaborative and multidisciplinary research, but also doing sort of contract services if there's kind of one-on-one needs with companies. And if you're not familiar with us at Vineland, we are located in Vineland Station. We're right off the QEW, and we have about 218 acres of campus with 35 buildings, and we have research laboratories, farms, and greenhouses. So it is a beautiful place to come and visit and a great place to be able to work. So at Vineland, I'm going to really be telling you today about, what I do sort of in my program around consumer sensory and market insights. But we also have research across 4 other programs that all are there to sort of drive support of the horticultural sector in Canada and Ontario, as well as that. And also we very much work cross-disciplinary across these different things. So integrating expertise from different areas to really sort of create solutions and create impact for the industry. So you can see we do things, everything from horticultural technology solutions, where we, have expertise in vision systems, AI, machine learning, systems integration, and technology validation. biological crop protection, a lot around integrated pest management, entomology, plant pathology, and biostimulants evaluation, as well as our plant responses in the environment, where we do a lot around plant production, soil health, and we actually have a new soil and substrate services lab, and then plant variety development, so around new breeding, and performance evaluations, and then as well as genomics, bioinformatics, and biochemistry. So I bring this up today because some of the examples that I'll be using, sort of touch on or sort of spread across some of these other programs at Vineland as well. So you can see, how this can really be integrated across the entire value chain. So focusing in then on, the program that I lead, which is around, really around supporting product development and innovation. And so we do this through sensory and consumer research, which I'll go into more detail what I mean by that. And then we couple that with market and business intelligence to really understand the consumer, define those new product opportunities, and help with market positioning. And one thing I just kind of like to sort of put up front is how we think about the consumer. So most people think of a consumer as, the person that goes into sort of the grocery shop or a winery or a garden center or something and buys that end product. But we know that the consumer is actually much broader and much bigger, and is actually, there's different points along sort of that sort of value chain of bringing a product to market that we need to understand consumer needs. So I think, we sort of think of the consumer as someone that uses economic goods, because like from my point of view, in order to get a tomato, you can see a tomato here on the screen, a tomato to the grocery store so that someone can buy it, we have to understand the consumer that's also the grower that wants to take those seeds on, sees the value in planting those in their greenhouse, and then also sort of the packers and the retailers that are, have steps sort of along those ways. And so we work to support sort of everybody sort of along the way of bringing products to market and identifying what are the needs, what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, what are the gaps in order to sort of complete that value chain. So how do we go about doing this? We have, a lot of sort of background expertise in different areas. So, sort of coming from sort of understanding, the biology of the products from a food science background, psychology, business, and statistical analysis. And we sort of use all of these and apply them to sort of the fields of sensory science, which is really about understanding the products like similarities and differences as perceived by our senses, as well as doing panel training and development, both, here at Vineland and for other businesses and companies that want to set this up within their own company. And then when you want to understand, okay, so if products are similar and different, how does that relate to understanding drivers and detractors of liking? So getting into the consumer science piece of it. And then how does that influence behavior, purchase intent, willingness to purchase, basically ultimately success, of a product. And then sort of on all of that is, once you have that information, you need to understand your market. So we do market research to look at the feasibility of new products and services, to look at the landscape, the path to market, and sort of what are all the things that we need to be considering or being aware of in order for a successful product, introduction. And that could be product being brought in terms of like a new flower or a technology or a service. So how do we do this? So one thing about horticulture, right, is there's a lot of different, opportunities, underneath it. There's a lot of different crops. There's a lot of different sort of challenges, but at the same time, sort of a lot of different opportunities. So one of the things that I believe is so important in sort of thinking about your consumer research is not taking a cookie cutter approach, not just taking something kind of off the shelf and saying, oh, well, we'll just apply this and see how it works out, but really thinking about like what it is that I need to answer these key questions that are, sort of hanging me up or preventing me from moving on to that next step, or what are those kind of questions that I need answered in order to be confident as I move along that product development pipeline. And so it's really about providing kind of customized data-driven approaches to integrate sort of knowledge from, different sort of sources throughout sort of that value chain, understanding of consumers and the markets to be able to position something. So I like to think about it as, sort of really thinking about like, what are the preferred products? And who are the people that like them? If we can answer all of those questions, then we're sort of on a good path of, being able to get those product opportunities properly positioned on the market. So in terms of understanding, what are those preferred products? If you're thinking of fruits and vegetables, there's a lot of variability and there's a lot of things that we can't really change. You can't take an apple and just go into the kitchen and add some more sugar to it to make it a sweeter apple. We need to then be looking at new varieties. So it's really important that we use sensory science to understand like the sensory component of what are those intrinsic sort of, inherent properties, of the product that we're working on. So it could be taste, texture, flavor, appearance, mouthfeel, all of these types of things that are things we need to understand because that's going to influence how people perceive, interact, and, accept essentially sort of the product. But we also know that as individuals and as humans, we're subject to bias and we're influenced by lots of messaging and information that's out there. And so we need to also understand how those extrinsic properties are also going to be impacting, choice, interest around different products. So for example, we know that talking about things such as, price, talking about production practices, is it organic, is it local, is it sustainable, talking about comparing it to sort of other products that are on the market. All of these things influence how people feel about products and, bias them in terms of their reactions around it. So we need to understand how these different concepts, features, and messagings, interact to understand, how to best put this product sort of forward. And then we need to figure out who likes them. And so whether that's the grower, the retailer, or sort of that, person buying it at the store, we need to understand who is our target market and what is our target market looking for. What are the consumer segments? Because not everybody's looking for the same thing. That would make life way too easy. What are the sizes of those segments? What are the demographics? What are the habits? What are the needs really of that? And so putting all of this together to really sort of drive this approach and figure out what are the key needs, for your business to be able to support this. So, as I said, I'm here to kind of let you know a bit about sort of where I see sort of the value of consumer research. And I think the biggest thing is, and you see this time and time again, and everybody's guilty of it, whether they'll admit it or not, is we don't always know what we don't know, right? And often if you're working within a specific area, whether it's, growing fruit, making wine, putting a new technology or software out to, manage your business, you have a specific lens and a specific kind of, expertise and, kind of understanding of what you're coming into. And so really you're basing everything, it becomes subjective because you're relying on your opinions and expectations of what you're planning to do next. And so what we really try to do and what I really try to focus on is providing that objective, representation of what's really going on, kind of removing that expert knowledge, removing those preconceived, biases, those conceptions that you think you may have around the industry to really understand the product and the target markets. And so looking at it from an unbiased approach, looking at it from a descriptive approach so that we can really talk about what are those differences and why they are or aren't important, and being representative to make sure that we're really understanding who our target client is, because we may think it's group A, but it's actually group C. And so we need to be able to look at that. And so, one thing I hear a lot is that consumer research is expensive. Well, it is, right? Because it's people's time, it's interacting with people, it's not something, mechanical that you can kind of just put into a machine. But it's often more expensive not to do it because then we make the wrong choices. And so then we have to kind of redo things or we have to sort of reposition. And so it's good to sort of, thinking sort of from the beginning of understanding where we need to get to so that we can use this, to really kind of tip the scale in your favor as you're developing new products or putting new products on the market or, developing new markets. So first of all, I'm going to kind of take you through sort of some of the approaches that we do and sort of provide some examples of how we go about, creating this value. So first of all is we often need to understand the product itself and understand it from, again, that sort of objective measurement of what are its product characteristics. And so sensory science is a great way of doing this, especially when we're working on, an edible product, which we are often doing here at Vineland. And so sensory science is a scientific discipline, and it's about using, it's to evoke, measure, analyze, and interpret reactions to stimuli. And this is actually the definition that's through ASTM. And there's a whole set of standards and methods that have been laid out by the ASTM on how to properly sort of do sensory science. And so ultimately what it comes down to is it's a set of techniques, it's a way of measuring the human sensory response to consumer products using people as instruments. So essentially we calibrate people to be able to take away sort of that bias, that subjectivity, and evaluate it based on how they perceive it through, sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing. And so we can do this through different ways. We can do it with a trained sensory panel, which I'll talk a little bit about because we have one here at Vineland. We can do it through expert panels. A great example of that would be, sort of winemakers or, beer experts and their subject matter in terms of evaluating their products. Or sometimes we want untrained panels because we don't want people that really know the product really well or are really good at picking out differences to see if sort of the average consumer can evaluate those differences. And, ultimately what we're learning about is, providing information around the similarities and differences of those products, which can both be kind of holistic, like looking at the product as a whole, or very different or very detailed in terms of what are the specific attributes that differentiate that product. So as I said, at Vineland, we do have a trained sensory panel. So we've got 20 part-time employees, and they're screened just to be based on their sensory acuity, which is how good they are at describing, differentiating, and rating the intensities of different products based on those 5 senses. And so we do this with our lab that we have at Vineland. You can see the picture of it there. We've got our 10 different booths, and we use a software to capture the data that we collect. We have different lighting that we can set up to mask those visual biases, and then a preparation area that we can use to be able to do that. And so one of the ways we also think about is masking bias and why it's so important is, and a good example that I often use is that if I give you a green apple, a red apple, and a yellow apple, just by looking at them, majority of people will say, well, I think the green apple is going to be the most sour, the yellow apple will be the softest, and the red apple will be the sweetest. But that's not always the case. And so by putting red light over all the apples and not being able to tell what color they are, then we can actually figure out what are the true characteristics and similarities and differences within those products. So I just thought I'd give you an example here of, how we can do this, to look at differences around a product set. So over the summer, because it was strawberry season, we hear a lot about people are interested in new strawberry varieties, that there's a lot more greenhouse operations or indoor operations that are looking to grow varieties, but that the benchmark that everybody's comparing it to is these field grown strawberries. So we wanted to see how that worked and what that looked like. So what we did was we took 2 field-grown Ontario strawberries, and we took a greenhouse strawberry and an imported strawberry from the US. So it's kind of like what you'd find if you went to a grocery store. And what we did was we developed attribute descriptors to describe these different strawberries. So coming up with things like floral, you can see them in the little brown bottles here, grassy, vegetal, berry, earthy, some of the characteristics that the panel used to differentiate between those different samples. Then we created references so that for earthiness, we could calibrate you just like you would a scale or something else. So we know we're all starting at the same point to be able to look at those differences in intensities across the product. And then we got to evaluate the product. So we had 4 strawberries, you can see there at the bottom, that we got them to evaluate. And then what we can do is we can look at those differences in intensity, and we can see how similar or different those products are. So you can see here sort of in the plot that we've got here that the the bluey lines are the field-grown strawberries, and that they were higher in overall aroma, taste, and one of them is sort of in sweetness, in comparison to the greenhouse grown, which was much lower it was the lowest actually for overall aroma, taste, and sort of highest for acidic, and also sort of lower for sweet. So we can see what some of the attributes are that really differentiate it. And if we wanted, we wanted the greenhouse grown to be comparable to a field grown, we could keep tasting different varieties until we saw that the lines sort of overlap. And then we could say, these strawberries all have a similar sensory profile. And so then you can look at other characteristics such as, yield and, disease resistance and, production, those agronomic traits, which are equally important in terms of, getting a product to market. So that gives us great information, but it doesn't tell us anything about what one's liked better, because it might actually be the most acidic one is preferred, right? That could be possible. And so that's where it's important to then go and look at consumer acceptance around these products. And so we think of consumer acceptance, it's really about how do product attribute differences impact liking, preference, and willingness to purchase. And then really understanding, as I sort of mentioned previously, on that relationship between those intrinsic properties that we can't always change about a product and those extrinsic attributes that can influence how you perceive a product, and how all of this impacts choice. Because the other thing to remember, which is what sometimes when you're in it, you forget about, is that preference is individual. And what I like best might not be what the majority likes best, or what, other people even in the room like best, because there's a lot of things that influence our preferences and our choices that are kind of out of our control. And so one is that preference is often, innate. We start at a very young age having preferences, for certain things. Even just your basic taste, you can see research that's been done in infants that you give them a sweet solution and a sour solution at even, a couple of, days, weeks old, and they react positively to the sweet and negatively to the sour. So those things are kind of hardwired into us and sort of aren't going to change, as well as differences in bitterness perception. So some people, barely pick up bitterness, whereas other people pick it up at sort of very, very, low levels, and that will impact how they interact with products, thinking of things like coffee or beer or other things that could have some bitterness into it. Preference is also cultural. So if you think of it, of how you're growing up, what foods you're exposed to, what's around you is going to influence sort of how you eat. So thinking of spice levels across foods or texture differences across foods from different cultures. I've got a picture here of a durian fruit, which, in some cultures is the best taste in the world, and to my personal taste is not very good. And so those things are also important to understand and how that influences what it is. And then we also know it's environmental. So if you're having, that amazing, dish or, glass of something, on vacation, looking out over your favorite scenery, whether that's the mountains or the ocean or whatever it is, you're like, man, this is amazing. And then you have that same glass, or dish at home after a really crappy day, and you're like, man, this wasn't really nearly as good. Because having food with, sort of friends, family, the conditions, all of that also, it changes it. So we need to understand how all of that comes into play in terms of managing expectations, understanding those differences, in preferences as we move forward. So I thought I'd give you an example of a project I did a few years ago with the Ontario Craft Cider Association and the Ontario Apple Growers that was funded through the AAC. And what we want to understand was, what is the sensory profiles that are available on the market? And so in terms of doing that, we looked at profiling about 50 ciders that were available. So top selling in the LCBO, local producers, imported ones in, just to see what's the diversity that's out there. And so you can see we have a lot of sort of different attributes that we looked at that the panel described these ciders on. And we could kind of group them into kind of three main flavor profiles. So barnyard, vegetal, yeasty, sweet and fruity, and then a balanced profile with a little bit of each in between. So this is great. We know that that's the diversity. And then talking to, the people within the cider industry, they sort of told us where they thought the sweet spot was and what they thought were kind of the best ciders in it, which were a lot of them kind of within this balanced profile, having more complexity and all of this. So what we decided to do is we took 15 of these ciders that represented this diversity, and we brought them to about 230 consumers in Toronto. And we got them to look at what are sort of those drivers of liking. And sort of just to kind of quickly show you what we saw here is everything highlighted in dark blue or in the blue boxes are, if those had the highest intensity, the ciders were more liked. And that's everything that is coming up in the sweet and fruity section. So overall, most of the consumers, there were segments that liked the balanced profile or even some of that barnyard vegetal yeasty ones better. But overall, the majority of them, when the attributes of candy apple, sweet, tropical fruit, and pear were higher intensities, they were liked more than the other ones. So that gives really good information of, if you're deciding, I'm going to have 3 ciders out there, how much you make of each one, who you focus on in terms of sort of those different profiles and the different flavors that are out there, and realizing that maybe as the cider maker, your favorite one might not be what, a lot of your customers are looking for. And so being able to provide market opportunities to address those individual preferences. But as we said, consumer research is expensive. And so we can't always go to consumers every time we want to understand what those product differences are. So another way that we can look at this is developing predictive models. So for our apple breeding program at Vineland, we've used our train panel, like I showed you with the strawberries, and we've created a list of 18 different attributes that describe these apples. We've done consumer work, and we've found this sort of sweet spot of where the majority of people like their apples to sit in. And what we've been able to do is create this preference map that that we can now, based on the intensity ratings of apples, so we can taste apples this year, based on those intensity ratings, we can predict where they're going to fit within this map. So we can predict if they have the right profile and intensities of certain attributes, like crisp and juicy and, sweet, floral, some of those that they're going to be on the right side of the map in the heart. And that if they're sort of too soft or bitter or have kind of tough skin, that they'll probably be over in this area. So we don't have to keep going back to consumers every single time, but we can create these models and use these as product development tools as we're identifying what are the best ones that we eventually want to evaluate with consumers. And so continuing on with apples, because, it is apple season starting here as we're coming up into October, is that choice matters. Not everybody's looking for the same type of apple. So even before I showed you, we have kind of a target area that we're getting into. Well, even within that target area, we've got different consumer groups that are looking for different things. And so, we can see that about 41% like apples with lots of sweetness and low acidity. But then we have this other group that about 20% that wants a sweet acid balance, and they want juicy and crisp textures. And then we have another group for 26%, and they don't really care about the flavors as much as long as that texture is there. And then we have the smallest group that really don't like any apples. They're pretty happy with most apples, but if they're mealy or sort of too soft or too high acid, then that immediately kind of takes away from their liking. So we can sort of think about this as well in terms of where do you want to target, or what kind of profile do you want to have, and how can that influence, what type of trees or what type of products, how you're messaging those in terms of trying to sell those, to your consumer market, whoever that consumer is that you're looking for. But we sometimes don't even need to taste the product. Sometimes we just want to understand, how people would react to it in terms of a messaging. So I was part of this larger project with the Ontario Grape and Wine Research Inc. that funded it in collaboration with some researchers at Covey at Brock University. And we were looking at, the potential of looking at Ontario's white, Vidal and red Marquette grapes. Well, red Marquette is like a new variety that's coming in. So I'm just going to highlight one little piece of the study. But what we asked is, have you ever purchased or drank wine made from Marquette grape? And we found that 51% had said no. Another 37% said not sure, which in consumer speak means no, but I don't want to tell you that I don't know. So essentially, it works out to almost 90% of them hadn't purchased or heard of this. So how do you understand if, what could make them interested? How do you talk about this wine if you have it at your winery? Where do you build it? So we thought, well, let's see if we can put some messaging in there and how that might impact or pique their interest. So we put together this story about Marquette. So, we talked about how the Ontario wine industry is exploring new red wine grapes with varieties such as Marquette, which just received VQA designation. Interest stems from desire to produce quality wines throughout Ontario's production regions. Talked about why it's ideal for Ontario due to its ability to survive our winters, its natural pest and disease resistance, and then also talked about its flavor profile. So it produces high quality, medium body wines, flavors of cherry, dark berry, spice, and results in high quality, sustainable wines at an affordable cost. And so, we looked at sort of different elements, but just to kind of give you sort of a high level, that after reading this brand story, we asked them some follow-up questions like, based on that description, how likely would you be to try Marquette wine made in Ontario? And we found that, likely to somewhat likely was almost everybody, right? So now we've got 90% of people that have never heard of this grape before interested in trying it because the messaging resonates with them. And so they want to learn more about it. And then we asked them as well, like, what would you pay for a wine like this? Since we talked about low cost, sustainability, those types of things. And so then we could get a gauge on sort of where that price point is. So this is out without even having a product available for consumers to try. We can get some really valuable information about what is important to consumers and what might interest them around your product. So, once we've figured out, okay, people like these are the sensory properties, what we want to do. Well, that's only part of it. Now we need to get it out to the market. Now we need to sort of understand that competitive landscape, that market positioning. And so there's a lot of then work that we can do about really, evaluating what those market opportunities are. So this here just, lists a whole bunch of different approaches that we take at Vineland to answer some of these questions. But, everything from environmental scanning to a SWOT analysis. Who else is out there? What are their strengths and weaknesses? What's our value proposition? Looking at competitive analysis, doing trend analysis to see where the market's going, what else is out there, how other businesses are changing, in terms of understanding how we adopt to things, looking at feasibility studies, looking around sustainability, messaging kind of, around that, and doing this in sort of a lot of different ways, anywhere from focus groups to interviews to just, looking through available public resources, to really kind of understand, the concepts of providing you the intelligence you need, helping you discover or answer those questions, and then helping you put that within your product development or, market development, opportunities. So again, I thought I would just highlight an area that sort of Vineland's been working in over the past few years and continuing to work in, because we see an area of a lot of value in terms of this kind of market research, and it's about waste upcycling. So basically tackling fruit and vegetable waste, but looking at it from the production side. So there's a lot of unavoidable waste that's produced just from growing the plants, right? So you grow a tomato plant, you pick the tomatoes off of it. Well, what happens to all those vines? And so are there other opportunities that we could create those into sort of value-added products? What's the cost benefit of doing that? Does it actually make economic sense to convert this into something else? What are the then product profiles of what it is that we're creating? Are they going to meet acceptabilities of, ingredient manufacturers, consumers, whoever it is that's going to be using it? And then, is there technology that we need to adapt to being able to, keep our main target product, but be creating value from those others, and how all that looks at? So at Vineland, we've been looking at this from like a waste valorization in food and then also non-food. So within the food sector, we've been doing a lot of looking at sector overviews and looking at sources of waste and opportunities for converting those waste, away from sort of, landfills, those types of things into, value added, basically instead of just kind of thinking of it as waste and throwing it away. Looking at it in terms of ingredients, so developing the value proposition and testing the functionality of these upcycled. They could have nutraceutical, properties, vitamins. They could have, things such as, pectin or something else that we can use as like a clean ingredient in food processing. We've also realized that we can be a big connector role, as well. And that's something really important that we don't think about in terms of consumer research. But if you want to get something through the value chain, you have to know the people along it, and you have to talk to those. So, connecting those people so that the people that have waste understand who are the people that need their waste, and so that they can work together to create that. And then also around identifying ways, like opportunity scoping in terms of helping people that produce waste, thinking about ways of what they could do to, create more value from that. And then also looking at it from the non-food side of things. So, this is, organic material. It's rich in nutrients, that could be valuable in terms of growing the next crop or something like that. And so we've been looking at it from both a compost and vermicompost, in terms of, integrating it into growing media to make sort of new repurposed materials for growing other crops, soil amendments that can be then applied to the field, and then also with biodigestates. And so whether that's the feed source that goes into the biodigester, or what are the outputs that come out of it, and then how can that create value for the business and as well for the sector. So one of the ways we started looking at this is you're like, how do you even get into this? How do you even start thinking about this stuff? Well, in 2022, through a CAST research grant, we released a report detailing the byproduct streams from the top 7 Canadian fruits and vegetables. So we interviewed over 40 growers, processors, and distributors across Canada, and we looked at apples, potatoes, field tomatoes, onions, carrots, greenhouse tomatoes, and cucumbers, as you can see there. And what we identified was, what are all the steps at sort of that processor level? So you can see here with, sort of apples, we've got the farm, the packer, the grade outs, what is the root, and what are the waste streams at each of those steps along the way? And what could we potentially do with those waste streams to create more value from them? And so this, report is available on our website, so people can go and look at it. But what it's done is it's created, opportunities to support businesses in helping them sort of identify, waste streams, or identify kind of end uses of things that, come from waste streams. So one example is we did a project with Province Brands, which is a company that's in Niagara in Thorold. And so what they're doing is upcycling agricultural waste to create novel sugar products. And so they've developed this technology to convert these sugars from dried hemp stalks and into both sort of like, food grade, animal feed, sort of different applications to look at it. And what they were saying is, okay, we know this works great for hemp stalks, but can we expand this into other waste streams to apply this technology to create value? And so Vineland was, brought on to sort of help them in terms of identifying other locally available crop waste streams that would be suitable for their process, where they are, what is their availability, who the people are to kind of connect with. And so we did sort of a lit review to understand, okay, what are the consistency, there's, certain requirements of the plant to be good for this process. We did sector interviews to understand what are the options based on that lit review and what are the best potential. And then we identified kind of the best crops, got some samples, sort of those that they could use to be able to evaluate, and we're able to provide them with the list of kind of most promising and other potential candidates, along with, seasonality of them, companies that, could be valuable to sort of help be that connector role. So here's someone that has their technology. They just need help understanding, sort of the sector and sort of what are other opportunities where they could really take advantage of this technology, sort of to build their brand. And then another example of a project we work on, and this was funded in part with the Greenhouse Technology Network, is we worked with Bayview Flowers. So they're in Jordan, Ontario, so again in Niagara, and they are a large flower greenhouse operator, but also run an anaerobic biodigester. And so it helps to create energy for their operation. And then it also has sort of the outputs of the biodigester, and one being this liquid digestate. And so they wanted to take this liquid digestate and they were commercializing it into an organic home use plant fertilizer. The problem was it's coming out of a biodigester, so it smells. And so we need to figure out, is this, what's causing the smell and how can we mitigate this? And then, sort of another question that came up is, what is the best of these smells, that, sort of can get from these odor mitigation, opportunities. So working with our biochemistry team here at Vineland, we were able to determine like the baseline chemistry of this. And then we were able to use this to look at different mitigation strategies to help them in terms of, creating a product that was going to be more consumer friendly. Sort of getting to the end here, but a couple more opportunities I just wanted to present is another thing we've been doing a lot, which is really, really valuable in terms of understanding kind of the market opportunity, especially if you're not sure where to go or you're trying out something new, is these market roadmaps. And so essentially it's about understanding the landscape. So you want to identify like, where is it that I want to be or that I think I want to be? What do I need to get myself there? And then we can help by identifying those gaps and opportunities along the way, and then help to provide recommendations. So this is where, we can use like interdisciplinary approaches. So, we can partner, plant production with, market research, with automation to sort of understand, sort of the sector, what are the needs across that value chain to provide, the information you need to bring a new project forward. So one example of this that I can just show is we worked on the landscape side of things. I'm talking a lot about sort of food. So on the landscape side of things, about understanding what is the Ontario urban tree value chain. So essentially, how do we get more trees planted in cities, and what are the steps along the way? One of the things we found is that everybody knew their role and who directly they were connected to, but beyond that, they didn't understand the whole landscape, that whole chain of what was involved. And so what we did was, through sector interviews and identifying who are the key actors within that value chain, which you can see here in the dots, we found that there's this tree planting pathway. But to be really successful, we also have to have this tree maintenance or communication. So we were able to identify where there's strong relationships and where in the dotted lines, there's need for sort of, improvement or room to grow. And so from this, we've developed the Greening the Landscape Consortium, where all these members are involved in creating value for the Ontario landscape industry in getting sort of more trees and more green space in urban areas. And then the final area I wanted to touch on today, which is because it's kind of everywhere these days, is understanding sustainability and how that fits into your product development pipeline, and how that fits into, sort of your consumer research kind of lens of things. Because part of understanding the consumer and part of putting your goods out now is understanding the environmental impact of your product. So that's another thing that, we're looking at too, is being able to support businesses in understanding like the life cycle assessment. What are the greenhouse gas emissions or carbon capture, out of the production of this product? What are the cost of production by doing more sustainable methods, and how does that improve or building on it that way? So looking at it from both kind of that mitigation and adoption, sort of strategy to really fully have that true picture of it. Because especially, I was in France in the summer, and more products have sustainability labeling sort of right on it, right? So you understand its nutritional content and you understand its sustainable footprint. And so that's something else that we're going to be seeing more and more, I think, as we move forward. And so something that we're really looking at from that consumer lens. So just in summary, just to kind of summarize what I've been talking about for the last half hour, is like, what is that value of it? So it's really about understanding your product characteristics and having an objective assessment of what your product's really like, because you always think your product's fantastic, but you need that sort of other lens on it to kind of get that third-party validation. Then you can define its value proposition, determine that consumer interest, understand that ecosystem that's out there, and then that can then help you define the best path to market, get confidence in your product positioning, understand how you compare to what's out there, or if you have no competitors, again, what is that value proposition, and even build in sort of that quality control of understanding, which isn't something I really talked about here today. So the final thing I'll leave you with is, some of the success stories that we talk about at Vineland that have come by infusing this, consumer research into our product development pipeline. So one is, we developed this national sweet potato propagation industry and launched this new variety, Radiance. Well, Radiance was all about understanding what the Canadian consumer was looking for in terms of, a best quality sweet potato. So what's the flavor profile? What's the color? How does it perform? Pureed, baked, fried, to get the sort of the best product that's out there, for the consumers and for the growers. We work with Vineland Growers Co-op in introducing the cold snap pear, winter's favorite fruit, and also the happy pear to sort of North America, which is a newer pear variety. So understanding, what consumers are interested in, what would attract them to buying pears, and how to really position that in the market. And so pears are something that can have a more of a winter, longer eating season, I guess, is like, for the lack of a better word right now, which is where we came up with sort of winter's favorite fruit. Then another one is around the 49th parallel collection of roses that we have here at Vineland. So we did a lot about understanding not what the grower wants, but actually what that end consumer is looking for in terms of like a hardy Canadian rose and sort of the colors, the profiles, and developed a whole brand strategy around releasing that. And then also working with a lot around sort of messaging. And it's another example. We worked with Okanagan Specialty Fruits around validating messaging around their non-browning Arctic apple with consumers. So with that, I hope I didn't spend too much time talking, but I just want to thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Bowen. That's fantastic. Actually, I was thinking it follows quite naturally from, we had a webinar yesterday, which is about working smarter, not harder. And when you ask that question, the obvious follow-up is, okay, how do I do that? And that's what we're trying to get to. And I think this is the same here. There's a lot of business gurus who are saying, the key to make a successful business is make a product that consumers want to buy. And again, the follow-up is, okay, but how? And I think you did an amazing job of illustrating just exactly how you can make a product that is going to appeal to consumers, which is really the key to success, right? But we've had a number of questions come in, and for you, I'd like to get to as many as possible here.
Wonderful.
The first question is, I'm not sure if this is someone looking to participate in one of your panels or actually would like some insights into how they can put together a panel of their own and implement this, but they're asking, how would you train sensory panel participants, or what are the requirements for training and learning? How would you select those people?
So we have a whole sort of screening process that we go through to bring new people on. The first thing we do is we want people that are interested and motivated. So, it's often people that are foodies and that are interested in the product, whatever, it is that you're working on. And then we screen them for their abilities, right? So can they pick out different aromas blind? If you give them to them again, do they remember what that aroma is to be able to identify it? If we give you a set of solutions that are increasing intensities of sweetness or sourness, can they put them in the right order and do that over and over again? So these are sort of some of the things. Can we give them a product they haven't had, and say, describe this to me. What are the key characteristics? So those are sort of some of the key things that we do, to sort of bring people on. So it's an iterative process of sort of screening people and picking the best one, and then doing sort of constant training around that product category to kind of keep things going. But I think my contact information is here, so I'm happy to answer sort of more questions, or sort of talk about sort of how we can support businesses in developing those panels for them, if anybody's interested.
Excellent, that's great, thank you. And just to remind our audience, we are still taking questions, so if you have anything to ask, please post it in the Zoom chat, and I'll be happy to pass it on to Dr. Bowen. Next question is actually about the learning the research methodology that's available, and insights into which tools are best used for specific audiences and for business and innovation applications. Do you have any insights into that?
Well, as I said, the best consumer research is customized for what your needs are, that you're looking at. There are so many kind of tools and sort of applications and everything out there. So I think, it's sort of tough to say, like, this is kind of the best resource. There's textbooks, there's papers, there's societies, there's, all sorts of places to do it. I think is you really, kind of identifying kind of what are your key questions you're trying to answer, and then focus on trying to address those, like those pieces of it. And I think the other thing is consumer research can be tiny little insights, like putting a poll up on social media, or doing a survey with your mailing list, to doing some, more in-depth studies, that we're working at here, or hiring someone to sort of come in, and support it. But I think the biggest thing is to be objective and think about, well, maybe my product isn't the best, or maybe it is, but I need to learn that through somebody else, and not just what I'm putting out to people. So in terms of it, like, a list of, specific resources or anything like that, I'm happy, again, if you want to reach out to sort of share some websites or some societies, but, there's so much research out there, which I think is some of the challenge, and where it's helpful to have someone that's actually kind of working in the space, even if it's just to kind of consult with and bounce ideas off of.
Right.
Sorry
So
if that's not super helpful.
no, I think it's a good message. Like one size does not fit all is essentially what you're saying in research. Okay, anything from a small poll to a whole scientific study and everything in between. So okay, yeah, that's valuable to know. Thank you. The next question is from a local soap maker, actually, and asks about the practical steps and strategies that can be tailored to accommodate the unique challenges and resources of a business of her scale. How might a small business like this one effectively implement and benefit from these findings? And they ask if you do any work with small businesses.
Yeah, we do work with small businesses, definitely, and we'll often find opportunities too, if finances are a problem, and looking at funding opportunities that can help support implementing this type of research within your business. I think as a small business, and trying to understand what are where should I focus, what are the key things, you can use things like looking at sales, looking at sort of feedback, like, are there certain soaps that always sell out first, are there certain aromas or aroma categories that seem to be most popular, and sort of having the other things, but sort of focusing there, looking at your data over a year and tracking it. Is there a seasonality to the types of things that sell, or the products that sell, or places where more often, and so that you can kind of tailor your production and tailor your offerings to seasons, or to where the majority of your business is going, and so that's where you can easily just through simple as Excel sheets, right, be able to kind of track some of these things to sort of create some KPIs, and sort of understanding of what are your best products, what are your biggest sellers, even things is have you can set something up within your business to get consumer feedback of, smell these 3 soaps, put a card on the one that's your favorite. Just little things like that can help you get some insight, so that it's being guided by your consumers, the people that are really using and interacting with your product.
Excellent, thanks. So those are some really great ideas, I think, and quite low cost to implement as well. I think a lot of people might be intimidated into thinking you need to have this great big scientific study with hundreds of panelists, but saying no, you can simply just have have consumers vote with a card which one they like best, or just feedback on social media or something would be insightful, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So the next question is about the wide variety in consumer preferences. And I remember you were talking about this a bit when you were discussing the apples, and how some consumers don't just want the bite, and some want the sweetness, and some actually might prefer the acidity. So how do you prioritize and make decisions when you've got these really varied and kind of at odds feedback from consumers? Is there a recommendation for balancing preferences and turning them into an actionable innovation strategy when you have this variety of feedback that maybe doesn't agree with itself, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, for sure. So that's always sometimes the challenge, right? Is you get all this information and you're like, oh, so there isn't an easy path forward. So now what do I do, right? And so then you have to think of it. I think another thing to always think about with it is that everything is like a piece of information, but for your business, you need to think back and look at the big picture and where those ultimate goals are and where you're trying to kind of build this, and direct this. And so, yes, there's going to be lots of consumer segments, sort of things change over time, things adapt. But again, if we're thinking of something like an Apple, it's like, okay, well, if 40% of the market's saying that this is what they want, and we have an Apple that's performing as well or better as those other benchmarks within it, well, then maybe that's a good place for us to tackle in, because we can be competitive in there. We think our product is as good or better than, the top Apples for the biggest consumer segment. But you might find that as well, that our Apples are okay in there, but where we really thrive is in those sort of little segments. So maybe we can differentiate ourselves from the consumers that are looking for something different. And then it also depends also on what the path to market is. So if you're doing this farm gate, like at the end of, at your farmer's market or, at your farm business, it's different than if you're trying to sell it to a retailer, because then the retailer is often informing you as well of what they're, looking for to fill sort of their, kind of market demands for it. But other things can come in play too. So what is the cost of production? What is the quality of those sort of different ones? What is easiest for me to grow and have a consistent, product offering to my consumers, or to make or to deliver? So that's where I said you sometimes have to like look at it all, and then look at all those other elements that are important in putting a product forward, and understanding the key steps, that drive your business. And so again, that's where I like to say it's not cookie cutter, but you do have to understand your business and where you're trying to get to make those sort of informed choices, and weighing your options to put the best package forward that you can deliver on, because that's the key thing, is being able to deliver on it.
Of course, absolutely. Thank you. I hope that was helpful to the person posing the question. The next question, this question actually, funny enough, reminds me of, so my dad had a business associate, a German man called Eber in the 80s, and he had a phrase that said, when you're digging for potatoes, it's less important to dig quickly and more important to dig where the potatoes are. So this question asks, how can you be sure that when you're doing research that you're actually gathering meaningful and actionable insights from consumer research, and not just collecting data that's not really giving anything valuable? Are there any metrics or key performance indicators that you should be tracking to make sure that your research is actually effective and giving you the answers that you need?
Well, I think that's sort of the key on that one slide where I talked about being representative, right? So, and understanding who is it that you're trying to target and who is it that you're asking questions to. So, an example, if we're doing a study and we want to understand, consumer preference to, a new potato variety, to use the potato example, so I'll stay there. If people hate potatoes, we don't want to hear from them. They're not our target consumer, right? So we can't just put out a broad survey to the whole population and have everybody kind of weighing in. We pre-screen, and so they have to meet certain qualifications that meet our product set. Like, they buy potatoes, they enjoy potatoes, they eat them in different formats, they're looking for local products, whatever it is that's important for our study, to kind of be asking the questions to that representative, group of population. Very early on, I did a study on a product category, and they wanted to know why people weren't buying it. And so we spent all this money trying to find all these people that didn't buy the product. And the number one reason: I don't like the taste. Well, you're not going to change that. So, those aren't the people you want to try to devote your time and energy into. It's the ones that are interested in your product, invested in your product, want your product. And so making sure that those are the people. So I think that's the one challenge of doing something like social media, is you have no control over who's giving your feedback back. So that could be a good initial step, but then you can kind of ground truth it with your customers, with your mailing list, with your people that are coming into your store or boutique or, business, to see if those sort of same trends kind of match up. And the same thing is track what are the important things. If you have like what's flying off the shelf, what am I always making more of, what am I always out of stock on, what are people asking for, and then also looking at trends, what's new, what are people asking for that they didn't ask for last year. Just keeping a list of some of those kind of things that you can kind of look back to and sort of see and understand what's there. And then that's the other thing where you can do is you can work with someone like Vineland or other companies that are out there to make sure that you're gaining access to representative panels. There's a lot of companies in Canada that have panels of hundreds of thousands of people that can pinpoint right into that product area that you're looking for to make sure that you're getting representative results.
That's great. Yeah. And I think that just spoke to your answer to the first question as well, where the most important thing is to get people who are actually interested in that in the first place.
Yeah.
So we had a question from the soap makers. An example there would be, well, you want to eliminate anyone who says, well, I just buy the off-brand soap from the grocery store and that's good enough for me. You want someone who's actually interested in a high quality soap first, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. So if price is their number one driver, well, then probably not much else is influencing them if that's what they're buying on. And so that's what we'll see as you look through and why segments are important. It's not even just about what they like best, but it's about what are the key characteristics they use to make choices. And so for someone, it might be that it's sustainable, that it's local, that it's handmade. For someone else, it might be that it's cheap, that it's on sale, that I can always find it, right? And so neither is wrong, but it's just you need to figure out who it is you're targeting to.
Excellent, thank you. We're 5 minutes to. I think we have time for one or two more questions. Next question, and I think this is sort of referencing the whole the scandals about the Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and people's data being used. But they're asking, are there any ethical considerations or potential pitfalls that businesses should be mindful of when they're collecting and using consumer data in research efforts?
Oh, 100%. So, in fact, there's whole ethical standards around conducting research with humans, and we, abide by those. There's ISO standards. There's all sorts of things, about looking at it. So, a couple of important things are making sure that, people are participating, voluntarily, that you are protecting and coding people's information. So, for example, we'll often provide people with a code, so instead of you being Hugo C, you're Apple 23, right? And so even if someone were to get into it, everything with your answers is coded to Apple 23, and then somewhere completely else that's not even connected with the study is where we can sort of connect that up using software that again sort of codes and sort of identifies it, allowing people the options that I prefer not to answer, or or I don't want to answer, or sort of not applicable, so that they feel sort of the freedom of providing sort of real information. And then also kind of just you can kind of check through the information sometime. If you're asking people a whole bunch of questions and everybody just puts okay, right, like number 3 down the board, well, just throw them out. They're actually not helping you in terms of the information that you're providing, and they might just be like a bot, or somebody that's trying to just do it for that free bottle of whatever, that free soap, or whatever the incentive is for participating. So you can do some sort of quality checks through in it. But I think the biggest, some of the biggest things are just giving people a little bit of upfront information about why you're doing it, why it's important to your business, and then ensuring the confidentiality of the information and how you're going to use it. Talking about we'll never use you, we'll never identify you. Everything will be, kind of collated and talked about as like the collective, versus, individual kind of information. And then also thinking about like, do I really need someone's salary? Is that really important to the questions that I'm asking to develop this, this product or not? Because if you're not actually going to use that information, don't ask those questions, and people will be more comfortable and open providing the information that you really need or want from them.
Yeah, it's great. I think it's a great question too to answer, is because it's the business ethics are so much top of mind for people, and businesses want to get it right, when they're doing this. So thank you for the answer. I think we have time for one more question with a quick answer, and that is some businesses might be wary of this sort of emphasis on consumer research leading to an issue of design by committee, if you will, and thus they lose the creative vision of their product. So how do you as a business strike a balance between relying on the consumer research insights but also maintaining the innovation and creativity in your product development process?
Yeah, I think that can always be a challenge and something that you have to think of. And I think the best way of doing it is I guess sort of I've seen, because I've been part of both, is okay, if who's the person that you're sort of tasking with developing the consumer research and what those key insights are, then trust them, give them that leeway to use that sort of creativity to bring those insights forward. Then bring all those pieces you need of that innovation pipeline together, and then kind of piece together the best of that to sort of move something forward. So, even in terms of like naming, it was like, well, I don't like that name because, it's no different than naming your dog or your kid or something else, right? Like, no, everybody has opinions, and then that's their name and everybody loves it, right? Once it's sort of been established. And so, part of it is of just, there's sometimes there's sometimes business considerations, there's IP considerations, there's copyright considerations. So you have to bring all those into play, but you have to let the people that are the experts do their job, bring you the insights, and then use those insights to develop those next steps. But don't micromanage the development of those insights or that sort of path to development, because that's where I think when you really sort of hamper it. So it's like, trust your team, that they're strong, that they're, using that, touch in on sort of the big vision, have debriefing, all of those things, but let a couple people go do the work, get that information, and then, make maybe the final decision, sort of by committee, but have all the information of all the considerations of why or why not, and don't bring it on personal opinion. I think that's the hardest part with by committee, is keeping that objective lens on the vision and what are those key deliverables that we're really trying to put forward.
Excellent. So consumer research is more advice, really, but you also trust your experts and trust your staff as well. I think that's an important way to address that balance. Thank you. So
Yeah.
we're pretty much out of time at this point, so we're going to draw things to a close here. My heartfelt thanks again to Dr. Bowen for an amazing presentation and discussion today. You've given us a lot of insight, so thank you so much. Thank you for Vineland Research and Innovation Center for making this session possible. And to all our participants today, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again on the next Espresso. Have a great afternoon.